The first point is Ukraine is not some distant land. It is right in Europe here. We got Ukraine here. And just a reminder, these countries neighboring Europe, they're all NATO allies. Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania. In fact, all these countries in green are NATO countries. And just look at the distances. You know, Kiev to Frankfurt, it's only a couple hours flight. Kiev down to Rome, a couple hours, a little longer to London. This is not some distant land. To have this kind of division, violent division right in the middle of Europe causes instability. It's a real worry to all these countries and to the U.S. because we're so close to them. Why does Russia care? Let's look at this next map. We've heard a lot about Sevastopol. This is the Black Sea fleet for the Russians. It's their only warm water port. All their ports up here in wintertime, often not accessible. And this one here is so key because it gives them access to the Mediterranean and then out to the Atlantic here. And this is the key national security for interest, really, when it comes to Ukraine and Crimea. And that's why when those 6,000 troops first moved into the Crimea, this is where they went first, right around Sevastopol. And it shows this is a key issue. It's not just for the West, certainly for Russia.
The whole country of Ukraine is pretty divided right now. And I want you to explain to our viewers how that unfolds.
No question. You can see it right here in the map. Here is eastern Ukraine bordering Russia. These are the percentages of ethnic Russians speaking. Here, 75% speak Russian, ethnic Russian. Here, 75%. Here, all over 50%. Once you get into the western part of Ukraine, bordering, remember these NATO allies here, here, and here. We're looking at only 5% ethnic Russian up here in the western parts of Ukraine. And that is also reflected in the pull between East and West. Many people here feel the pull towards Russia, deep cultural, historic ties, language ties. Many here feel the pull towards the EU and the West. And we've seen that reflected in their elections as well. In 2010, when voters went to the polls, this part of the country voted for the pro-Russian candidate, Viktor Yanukovych. This part of the country voted for the pro-European candidate, Yulia Tymoshenko, who until a week ago was in prison.
The U.S. and its NATO allies have begun military exercises in the Black Sea amid the ongoing tensions on the Crimean Peninsula there. The war games are held by the naval forces of the United States, Bulgaria, and Romania, with the American destroyer USS Truxtun taking part in the drills. Bulgaria says the military maneuvers are aimed at enhancing the operative compatibility of NATO's naval forces. Participants also said the exercises had been planned last year. However, they come at a time when tensions are running high in the Black Sea peninsula of Crimea. The region is now part of Ukraine, but it's seeking a secession from the crisis-hit nation to join neighboring Russia.
NATO fighter jets training Tuesday, a show of solidarity against Russia, just as NATO foreign ministers announced a suspension of military cooperation with Moscow. The U.S. had already put on hold joint training with Russia.
Russia today has challenged truths that only a few weeks ago appeared to be self-evident. That in the 21st century, the borders of Europe would not be redrawn with force.
But U.S. officials tell CNN the overwhelming majority of the 40,000 Russian troops remain in place on its border with Ukraine. Several hundred may have moved around, but it's not clear any have actually left. On the Ukraine side of the border, CNN's Carl Penhall found poorly equipped forces preparing to defend themselves against an invasion they still expect.
And throughout the day, the military have been pulling up armored vehicles and tanks.
NATO will now boost its own security posture.
Today we directed our military commanders to develop additional measures to enhance our collective defense and deterrence against any threat of aggression to the alliance. We will make sure we have updated military plans, enhanced exercises, and appropriate deployments.
But could Russia be pushed too far and retaliate? NATO and U.S. supplies for the war in Afghanistan often travel through Russian territory and airspace. Russia and the U.S. coordinate intensively on arms control and nuclear weapons testing.
2, 1, turn.
Working together is still vital.
I don't think we want to cut off any cooperation on counterterrorism. Russia has provided us with useful warnings. We've provided warnings to them.
But Russian President Vladimir Putin may have gotten exactly what he wanted, keeping control of Crimea. As long as he doesn't invade Ukraine, the West may be happy to let him keep what territory he has. Barbara Starr, CNN, the Pentagon.
There's clearly a message that's being sent here. We're going to pan the camera right over right now so that you can see this U.S. guided missile destroyer from Norfolk, Virginia, the Truxtun, with a crew of approximately 300 on board, steaming right now, Jake, up the Bosphorus Strait. It is that geographic natural choke point and the only way that any sea vessel can get in to the Black Sea. Now, the U.S. Navy says that this was a previously scheduled journey to conduct joint naval operations, as you mentioned, with Bulgaria and Romania. But the situation in the Black Sea and in the Crimean Peninsula is anything but normal right now. The Russian military has effectively occupied the Crimean Peninsula, which is home not only to the Ukrainian Navy, but also to the Russian Navy. And you recall just last Tuesday, we spoke from this very same point in this Bosphorus Strait about Russian warships, two of them that had sailed up to the Black Sea, and also Ukrainian naval vessels. So a lot of the crisis right now stems from naval power, from Russia's traditional claim to the Crimean Peninsula for more than a century as a vital and strategic warm water port for a country where much of its coastline is frozen in by ice, especially during the winter months. Part of why it is so valuable to Russia to have the Crimean Peninsula as a place where its Navy can move in and out of. And on top of that, and I'll remind you again, this is a U.S. Navy destroyer, the Truxtun, that sails normally out of Norfolk, Virginia. On top of that, the Russian military at this point is blockading a number of Ukrainian naval vessels in the Crimea at their home port. There's actually scuttled at least 2 ships to keep Ukrainian Navy ships from being able to move out from there. So the naval component is a very important part of the crisis, the geopolitical tug of war that we're seeing around Crimea, around the Ukraine right now. And that's why, amid the diplomacy that we're seeing going on between Moscow and Washington and the European Union and Kiev, the movements of naval warships like this are also important. They send messages right now, as U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel has done earlier this week, announcing that the U.S. would step up joint air patrols over the Baltic Peninsula. That's a clear sign of support to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, 4 former Soviet satellite states, all very concerned right now, Jake, about the Russian military moves into Ukraine and into the Crimean Peninsula.
Overseas tonight, there is a tinderbox in Ukraine, and 2 giant world powers are staring at each other across the divide. Today, the steely Russian president sent a kind of taunt, a Russian fighter jet flying above an American warship. Putin and Obama had a phone call today. What was in it? ABC's Alex Marquardt has the latest.
A new escalation. This American destroyer buzzed repeatedly on Saturday by a Russian fighter jet in the Black Sea. The Pentagon revealing today and calling it provocative and unprofessional.
The message is, we see you, we don't like you in our backyard, and we prefer that you would leave.
This as none other than the head of the CIA, John Brennan, was secretly in Ukraine. Shades of a new Cold War. America and Russia now squaring off over Ukraine. President Putin denied the charge on a call with President Obama tonight, urging him to stop Ukraine from using force against protesters. First, Russia took Crimea. Now pro-Russian unrest is sweeping the eastern part of the country, and the U.S. is accusing Russia of orchestrating.
We are obviously very concerned about Russian actions in Ukraine, attempts to destabilize Ukraine.
Well-equipped armed gunmen and mobs are seizing control of government buildings, which we've seen firsthand as they've prepared for a crackdown Ukraine says is coming. There are piles of broken bricks. There are poles, bats, batons. Here, a row of Molotov cocktails ready to go. The matches to light them so that they can throw them down onto anyone trying to storm the building below. The fear tonight is that bloodshed will only add fuel to the fire, and Russia may use it as an excuse to invade, taking this standoff with the U.S. to a new and dangerous level. Alex Marquardt, ABC News, Donetsk in eastern Ukraine.
Today, Ukraine's military made a move to dislodge pro-Russian militants who've taken over government buildings in 10 eastern cities. Ukraine and the U.S. both blame Russia, perhaps setting the stage for an invasion, as it did in Crimea. Holly Williams is in eastern Ukraine.
In Kramatorsk today, Ukrainian troops were helicoptered in and then tried to flush out pro-Russian separatists who had taken over an airfield and other government buildings. But as they fought to remove militants in one city, 80 miles away in Shakhtersk, another group took over peacefully. The men now in charge told us no shots were fired. They simply walked into the mayor's office and took control. Ukraine's government claims the insurgency has been instigated by Russia, but it also has popular support here in the east of the country. Many of the protesters are blue-collar workers who accuse the central government in Kiev of discriminating against Russian-speaking Ukrainians. Shakhtersk is a coal mining town that's fallen on hard times. Andrei told us they had a better life when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, and they want more independence from the central government. Nikolai took us up to the roof to show us the flag they've raised. The new flag. The flag of the autonomous eastern Ukraine they hope for. He said he prays Russia will help them if things turn violent here too. The regional governor here in Donetsk told us today he fears the use of force could provoke a military intervention from Russia, just like we saw in Crimea last month. And Scott, he believes the only solution is to negotiate with the separatists.
Holly Williams covering for us in eastern Ukraine. Thank you, Holly.
Отвлечение внимания террористов. Произведены отвлекающие взрывы из рыбаков с патронами. Вооруженных сил Казахстана подполковником Семеновым. Шилка. Боевого применения 100 метров. Скорость 200 км в час. Назначены для уничтожения малоразмерных, подвижных и неподвижных.
777 выполнил. Цели поражены. 180-й. Я 102-й. Вас понял.
Для нанесения ударов по объектам в глубине боевого порядка противника.